Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I just want to start with that last slide, or one of the slides that Ryan showed, where I talked about the investment in the Southeast. And really, to me, that just resonates so much that the future is electric, and OEMs and the industry are committed. We're just in this messy middle. And so we'll get through it. There's a lot of uncertainty, but today I'm going to highlight some of the trends and then also some of the drivers of our accelerating or deaccelerating adoption, and then highlight a few of our findings from our EV adoption study. So I want to start out with, there's a lot of news in the media that no one wants an EV, but you can see on this slide, we've continued to see progress. Last year was another record year of 1.3 million pure battery vehicles that were sold, and we're also continuing to increase the amount of share. So you can see on this chart that we got close to 7.3%. And I think one of the things that just to really note is that with this kind of new technology, we can't expect to have 46, 47% year-over-year growth. That's just not realistic. So I think we're on the right trend, and we're going to continue to grow, even though we have a lot of uncertainties. And one of the things on this chart I wanted to highlight is that I think with more competition, we're going to see more innovation. And so on this chart, you can see that Tesla, who's dominated this industry for the last decade, is starting to get a lot of competition. And Honda Group, GM, and Hyundai Group really did well last year. And interestingly about Honda, they launched their Prologue like April, and it did so well. And you can see on this, between Honda and Acura, they really made a lot of sales, volume over 24 versus 23. So just want to show that this kind of highlights the competition and kind of who's kind of really increasing their volume and who's starting to see declines. And I wanted to highlight this just to go a little deeper into Tesla, because there's a lot of conversation about Tesla, especially in the news now with Elon focusing on Doge, what's happening to the brand. And so I think Tesla, they peaked their volume in 2023 and their share in 2020. And they haven't had any new models except for the Cybertruck, which is very niche, very expensive. And so you can see on this chart, they're just continuing to decline. So unless they change their strategy and have new products that resonate, mass adoption, I think that's going to continue to decline. And then you can also see on the right in our brand study, their brand consideration has also started to decline. And I pulled this out from Southeast just to kind of show you how the Southeast in terms of Tesla share. And for the majority, there's a couple locations where there were lower volume in 2024, as you can see on this chart. And in terms of overall adoption by state, the average, and this is retail only, personal retail. So it doesn't include fleets, but you can see that there's a wide range and it varies by state. The overall average is about 9.3% for EV adoption. And then for the Southeast, I listed what 2024 EV adoption was and the share. And as noted earlier on the slides that we saw from Ryan, Florida leads in volume, and then you have Georgia and then North Carolina coming in after that. And I wanted to highlight this. This is vehicles in operation, just to show that this transition is going to take a long time. The average vehicle stays on the road 12 plus years. And so as we start to move more and more EVs onto the road, it's going to take a long time. But just wanted to highlight this. With even California, you can see they have 4.8 of their vehicles, or 4.3 are electric. So it's going to take a long time. But I think there's a lot of things in place, and as we continue to see more and more adoption, that'll kind of increase it over time. Looking forward into 2025, last year we were anticipating 10% share. With all the uncertainty, we're thinking more about probably the market share will be around 9%. And that's going to be dependent on the overall volume of new vehicle sales. We had forecasted 16.3 million new vehicles would be sold in the US in 2025, but now we're forecasting around 15.8 million. So that EV share is going to be dependent on that overall new vehicle sales. Now let's look at some of the factors influencing EV adoption. So the average transaction price average over 2024 was about $7,000. So there's a premium. And that's why it's so important to have the Inflation Reduction Act. And this incentive on here is not including IRA, but actually manufacturer and dealer incentives. So you can see on here 14.8%. And that's really driven the sales because of that price premium. And this, in looking at different makes, Chevrolet tends to do really low incentives, but there are some models and makes that have over 30% incentive on them. So that's a big driver for this adoption for EVs. The other driver for EV adoption, as you probably know, is leasing. When that leasing loophole that you've probably heard. So you can see on this chart, when that was announced, we started seeing uptick in EV leasing penetration. And looking at the numbers on this, you can see on this chart, over 500,000 EVs were leased in 2024. And the good thing to highlight about that is when these EVs come off lease, it's going to provide a whole new option for consumers in the used market, which will be really important. Right now, I think the number of EVs that come off lease is about probably 3%. We're forecasting by 2027 that the number of vehicles coming off lease that will be EVs will be around 16%. So consumers will have options. One caveat is if prices do increase because of the tariffs, used prices will increase as well. So that's kind of an unknown. But definitely I think leasing has been a good option for consumers for a lower monthly payment. Also, if they're wondering if more battery technology, they're waiting for new models. So I think we'll continue to see EV leasing grow unless the IRA is eliminated. The other thing that I wanted to highlight that's really helped is just the introduction of new models. And this goes back to the comment about just the industry is committed to electrification. In the upcoming years, 30 new models will be launched. And some of the key models, when I think about 2025, you have, like the Chevrolet Equinox Blazer, which are pretty well priced, the Prologue, the Bolt is going to be refreshed. I think that's going to do really well. We have some of these three-row, like Hyundai has an SUV that's coming out. I think the ID4 was refreshed, and even the Model Y has been refreshed. So we might start to see an increase in Model Ys as well. But this is just really important to offer different models and different segments, different price points for consumers. So I think this is going to continue to shift, and we might see a decline depending on what manufacturers do with production. So some of it might be scaled down. This one on alternative powertrains I wanted to highlight. This is something that actually could take away from EV adoption. We've started to see a huge uptick in gas hybrid sales, 40.7% from Q3 24 versus Q4. And I think just because for a consumer, as you know, with the gas hybrid, there's nothing different. They don't have to worry about charging. They get a lower monthly payment. They also get some of the environmental benefits if that's important to them. And then as you can see on this chart, Toyota and Honda own the gas hybrid market, and Toyota alone has over 50% of the market. Their Camry, which is only available in hybrid that last year was launched, that's the top selling gas hybrid. So I think just the importance of the hybrid and how that's going to continue to kind of be that gateway transition to full electrification. And then just also another positive driver, which we saw Ryan mention, is just the continued growth in infrastructure. And I think one thing just to note on this, which I think is really important, is that the OEMs have adopted the North American charging standard. So I think having standardization is going to be key for consumer adoption. Being able to go to any charging station, no matter what vehicle you have, being able to charge, being able to pay easily, I think that's going to be so important that it's accessible, reliable, safe. So I think we're going to continue to see that. And I think even though we know currently like 80% of EV owners charge at home, I think as we get further adoption, the importance of having that public charging availability and charging for multi-dwelling units is going to be critical. The other thing that's continued to help, I think, with the lowering the average transaction price is the battery price. So it's continued to decline over the last decade. The one thing now, though, is there's overcapacity, and so that could potentially increase battery prices. The other thing, there is a proposal for to increase the tariffs on graphite, which China dominates. And if that happens, you could see 50% plus increase in the anode part of that battery price. So this could be impacted as well and impact the overall cost of the EV. And then before I go into some of our consumer insights, just all this, there's a lot of uncertainty, right? With the IRA, EPA, CAFE standards, CARB requirements, tariffs. The one thing, though, is that OEMs have had to navigate many administrations. So they're committed. They do their product plans years in advance. They've made huge investments. So we might see some shifts, but once again, the future is electric. So I think that's the positive thing I wanted to mention. Now going into a few things from our consumer EV adoption study. One thing that I think is really positive, when we interviewed consumers who are interested in buying a vehicle, not an EV, within the next 2 years, when would be a good time? They said within the next 3 to 5 years. So I think that's a really positive, knowing that we're going to continue to see battery advancement, infrastructure growth, and I think it's an opportunity for things to get more advanced for those consumers. And then 6 to 9 years, 15% said that they would be interested in buying an EV. So I think that's a really positive data set from consumer sentiment around EV. And I think one of the key things around, I think, just adoption overall is the education. And I know that's probably going to be discussed a lot today. But on this thing, I think the middle thing was so interesting, where you could see the impact of the federal battery. When we interviewed consumers, 86% were more likely to purchase an EV if they were aware of the EV battery warranty. And so I think that's just a highlight that there's a lack of education. If a lot of consumers aren't aware that the EV has a battery warranty, because that's a big concern for consumers. What happens if the battery dies? How much is it going to cost? The other thing on this that we found is that whole exposure familiarity, which I think is key. And when looking at the Southwest, I was looking at Georgia data, and we're starting to see more EV adoption with Hyundai Kia. And I think that's obvious, right? We have a huge plant, and I think some of the other locations that we saw investment, we're probably starting to see an increase in those models of EVs in those states. So familiarity is key, and education. And then finally, just wanted to highlight that consumer demographic who's considering an EV. It's becoming more Gen Z, multicultural, and lower household income. And I want to highlight that, and that just shows the importance of having more affordable EV models and how important the used EV market is to have that different price point for consumers. And then also, I think from a multicultural Gen Z, how do you market and attract and engage these consumers is going to be really critical. And then just to end, the road is bumpy, EVs are coming, there's going to be changes in incentives, and that's going to shift the timeline, and it's going to be critical for EV to have price parity, and then infrastructure key, and then education.